Today, most crypto transactions take place on centralized platforms like Coinbase, but a rapidly growing number of transactions are purely peer-to-peer, as we know, on decentralized exchanges, disintermediated. And the growth of DeFi is fueled by a desire of some who simply don't want big brother, big banks monitoring and manipulating their transactions. Fair enough. But we can assume that it's also fueled by those who don't want to be regulated for other reasons, because they're interested in tax evasion, fraud, or far worse, money laundering and other criminal matters. And I don't purport to know what the percentage is, but we know that some percentage of DeFi users will be defrauded, and they'll be swindled, and they may even be blackmailed or threatened. And I don't believe I'm just talking out of thin air here. We certainly have an awful lot of evidence in what we see anecdotally in the media. We also see studies emerging, such as that was published in January of 2025 in the Journal of Cybersecurity. It collected data on 1,141 profit-driven crimes from 2017 to 2022. Of these, 91% were related to DeFi. 9%, or only 105, were to centralized finance. The study would certainly suggest that DeFi is where the action is when it comes to fraud and crime. And the entire crypto asset industry suffered losses of more than $30 billion in that span of time based on the 1,141 crimes that were studied. The findings show that DeFi participants are the first victims of crimes, 52% of the cases. Alternately, DeFi actors were themselves malicious perpetrators. And so I recognize that this bill explicitly regulates centralized platforms and explicitly does not regulate DeFi. What I was hoping we would do in the hearings leading up to markup in this bill is actually to talk about what solutions there might be for all of that fraudulent and criminal activity that is happening in DeFi. I appreciate that's by design that this bill leaves DeFi largely unregulated, actually entirely unregulated. But as I conveyed in an earlier hearing, this is something like launching a global naval war strategy that deploys all of our ships to Lake Superior and leaves the oceans unattended. So there is already a study contemplated in this bill in Section 505 of the bill to study DeFi. And it studies lots of wonderful things about the merits and benefits of DeFi and so forth. There is a very limited language that makes vague general reference to illicit activity and what it calls the risk of pseudonymity. There's no specific solution that's proposed for study. And so I don't suggest that one solution is exclusive, but there ought to at least be a solution that gets studied to determine whether or not we ought to consider it. And the idea is not a new one, it's an old one. It's about a regulatory sandbox, and the idea is to give DeFi users a choice. They could choose DeFi where participation remains pseudonymous, where they can be anonymous in participating, or they could choose a DeFi exchange that provides within a sandbox the ability for users, when they have been defrauded or they're victims of crime, to be able to seek a court order, a subpoena, to be able to identify other users who are involved in those transactions. Some consumers will prefer, obviously, to engage in DeFi without any of these protections, and some will prefer to know that if they're defrauded, there is some recourse. They can identify who it is who defrauded them so they can bring suit or perhaps report a crime. Now, obviously, blockchain provides immutable transaction records, but it doesn't help much if you can't identify the culprit. And that is why having some option for DeFi users makes sense, whether that's imposed by regulation or perhaps by industry agreement through an ISO or other mechanism for dApps or crypto wallets, whatever the mechanism might be. I simply seek that we study one possible solution. I'd welcome any others, but if we're going to pass this bill, we ought to at least give serious consideration to what are the options for us in the months ahead when we see the crime and fraud that we know is inevitable in DeFi networks. Thank you.